A new poll carried out this month by Savanta ComRes suggests 53% of UK voters are in favour of rejoining the European Union, including a huge majority of those aged under 54. So I guess the question is, when will the government listen to the will of the people? And if you'd like a reminder of why Brexit has been so bad that most people want to rejoin the EU, stay tuned. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification icon. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I've obviously been watching too many of Phil Moorhouse's videos. I've spoken in my previous videos about the tyranny of the majority, a phrase used by John Stuart Mill, the former MP and influential political philosopher, to describe the potential threat to liberty arising from any system of democracy without adequate checks and balances. The danger that even a slim majority can oppress the minority and leave them with no voice, no influence and no consideration. It's almost like John Stuart Mill foresaw Brexit 162 years ago. Since the advisory referendum, the Vote Leave contingent has never sought buy-in from the Remain camp. It was straight to, "We won, you lost, get over it," or "just move on." That transitory 3.5% margin excluded EU citizens resident in the UK, as well as British people who were settled abroad. I say transitory because all the polls tell us that throughout the referendum campaign and ever since, there was only a 2-week period where the Leave voting intention was larger than the Remain voting intention. And that was the week either side of the actual referendum, and which was immediately preceded by the multi-million-pound blitz of social media by the Vote Leave camp, paid for with money partly sourced directly or indirectly from Russian citizens with connections to the Kremlin. The Leave campaign's expenditure was found to have exceeded the limits allowed by law and led to fines being levied on the Vote Leave campaign by the Electoral Commission. Fat lot of difference that made to the referendum result, of course. Maybe we should just accept the Leave camp's exhortations to just get over it. But my point is that this purely advisory referendum has very much resulted in John Stuart Mill's tyranny of the majority. And it's not just that it was purely advisory and influenced by money from other countries. The Leave campaign was also founded on false claims and willful dishonesty. The electorate were initially told that the Leave campaign was all about a political divorce from the European Union and taking back control from the European Court of Justice, and that no one was seriously suggesting leaving the single market or the customs union, let alone the Erasmus student exchange programme, the European Space Agency or the European Medicines Agency. But as the Conservative Party was infiltrated and eventually morphed into the UKIP party using the Tory banner, so the new extremist leadership, dancing to the tune of Jacob Rees-Mogg's so-called European Research Group, began gaslighting the British public into believing that Brexit had to mean an extremist hard Brexit. When 48% of those eligible to vote voted to remain in the EU, how can an extremist hard Brexit in any way represent the will of the people? The answer is it doesn't. It represents at best the tyranny of the majority, and more accurately, the extremist views of a very small group of people who have infiltrated the Tory party leadership. Your Alexander Johnsons, your Jacob Rees-Moggs, your Pritla Patels and your Dominic Raabs. If the advisory referendum had been legally binding, then a form of Brexit that represented this 52-48% split, that would have been a purer democracy. But instead, we've ended up with a Brexit that seeks to sever every link with the continent, political, security-related and cultural. It was such an extreme Brexit that in order to strike the deal, Lord Gormless, David Frost, and his handler Alexander Johnson had to invoke the European Court of Justice as an arbiter in the Northern Ireland Protocol, part of the Brexit deal that they designed, ratified and agreed to. So in some ways, the hard Brexit camp ended up with the worst of both worlds. A hard Brexit that has knocked 4% off British GDP in the long term, has engendered some sort of mass hostility and a warlike approach to our friends and nearest neighbours on the continent, has implemented a tyranny of the majority by disregarding the views of the majority of the British public favouring rejoining the EU, And yet, baked into their hard Brexit deal is a role for the European Court of Justice, which could have been avoided had this Brexiteer government signed up to a Brexit that retained the single market and customs union. I mean, this is the sort of stupidity you expect from a negotiating team headed up by Frost and Johnson, that are criticising and threatening to tear up the very Brexit deal that they themselves negotiated, agreed to and implemented less than a year ago. Brexit is turning out to be a death of 1,000 cuts. Companies that have gone out of business, or like mine, have suffered a severe hit in turnover as a direct result of Brexit. Skilled people that have lost their jobs and are now being pushed to retrain as HGV drivers, abattoir workers or vegetable pickers. Thousands of hard-working people who had dreams like me of retiring to the sun and now find that they can only stay 90 days at a time within the EU. Inflation running rampant as costs of food, fuel and clothing soar in post-Brexit Britain. Families separated by the new borders between Britain and the EU. Supply shortages, staff shortages, a 90-fold increase in documentation for imports and exports, the loss of opportunities for undergraduates to experience European cultural exchanges, more difficulty for performing artists to tour in Europe, poorer medical provision for Brits on holiday in the EU, and on and on and on. And that's just the Brexit bonuses for individuals. The more significant damage is wreaked on the very structure of the United Kingdom itself, with the strongly pro-EU voting Scotland and Northern Ireland being forced to dance to the tune of England and Wales after the advisory referendum. My Scottish friends are quite rightly angered by this perfect demonstration of the true balance of power between England and Scotland, which is yet another example of the tyranny of the majority in our flawed democracy. And as for Northern Ireland, well, this Brexit deal struck by the incompetent fool Frost and Johnson is threatening the entire peace process there and has invoked the hostility of the United States towards any possible trade deal with a post-Brexit Britain. And that was always meant to be the golden unicorn in the sunlit uplands of this new Brexit land. But let's continue to tick off all these other Brexit benefits. The reduced size of the economy, the embarrassing cut in overseas aid, the diminished British international influence and soft power, the fact that our nation is a laughingstock around the world because of this self-inflicted damage. And this week, we found out that because of leaving the EU and ceasing to be a party to the Dublin Agreement, where asylum seekers were forced to apply for asylum in the first member state they arrived in, those migrants crossing the channel in small boats can no longer be returned to France or any other EU country. As a result, the thousands that were returned each year before Brexit has somewhat diminished in number. Of the 23,000 migrants crossing the channel and arriving this year, only 5 have been returned. Not 5,000, 5. I wonder how many Brexit voters really are telling the truth when they say, I know what I voted for. I would suggest not a single one of them. Not only did they think they were voting for tightened controls on immigration, they also thought they were voting for the easiest trade deal in history, a new UK-US trade deal, £350 million a week for the NHS, sovereignty for Parliament, which was then trampled on by the illegal prorogation ordered by Johnson after he lied to the Queen. And still they complain about the EU and criticise the fact that the EU have actually implemented the very Brexit deal that Britain agreed to. And with Angela Merkel stepping down in Germany, a competent leader of a UK within Europe could have been the most single important voice within the EU. But we took ourselves out of the game and have only ourselves to blame if we don't like what follows. We're less than a year into Brexit and already it has the stench of a rotting corpse. During our 45 years of EU membership, the world outside of Europe moved on, but little Britain still had delusions of grandeur, memories of global privilege and empire. The trade deals so far struck remind us of our own diminished importance, as they're worse than the trade deals that we had as a member of the EU, and in some cases have been proved to harm rather than help our economy. But at least we've got our sovereignty, whatever that means. Well, what it does mean is that a one-party government elected on 43.6% of the vote can do what the hell they like without having to abide by EU rules designed to protect our basic rights and freedoms.